This video is all about a commission that I recently completed. Magnets, a shop-made bullet that's actually a key, and tons more. For the frame of this box, which includes the legs and all the rails, I needed an overlapping mortise and tenon joint. For now, I will keep the legs square, and then later I can taper them from narrow at the top to wider at the bottom. This, of course, makes the joinery much easier. You may also notice that each rail can be flipped up or down. That way I didn't have to cut lefts and rights. I am using the incredible Panther router, but this could be cut by hand or maybe at a table saw router. Lots of ways to do this. These spacers represent the depth. You can see the pencil line mark that I'm going to go. That's the distance. Super easy to set up. So with that bit touching the end of the tenon that's going to be cut, I can slide that left stop in place, add my spacers between the right stop, lock that down, and that's exactly how deep it'll plunge. Then I can move the left stop out of the way. I've been thinking about this project for over a year, ever since Tony contacted me and came up to visit me at the shop. At this point, I had a solid game plan, and I was super excited. And of course, it's always a good idea to mill up more material than you need, and sometimes I'll do it in a different species that just makes it easier on the bit. This is poplar, very easy and soft, but also it distinguishes between the actual parts. And here's one of the actual rails with the offset tenon and the corresponding offset mortise. There are probably lots of ways to do an offset mortise and tenon. I just pretended that I was going to make a regular mortise and tenon and then added this little spacer on the inside. Worked extremely well. I wanted to show a quick view of the drawing. This just helps things get more clarified in my mind. And there's the main part of the frame, just dry assembled at this point. Since this is being made for Tony, a police officer, I assumed that the key, air quotes, could be made in the shape of a bullet. This was a super fun aspect of this job. At the lathe, I turned some brass to mimic the casing and then some copper for the bullet. And of course, instead of a primer, I press fit a strong neodymium magnet. This process actually took me several keys or tries to get the fit or the strength of magnets just right. Plus, the more attempts I made, the better looking my bullets turned out. This part is a test run in a scrap the same thickness and size as the bottom front rail, and I'm just testing how the magnet or the bullet is reacting. I'll show more of the latch and the key later. Check this out. So, bowl of water, a lid, the key, right? Now I have a smaller lid, just so that key doesn't roll around. We'll put that in this first lid. And watch what happens. That thing will magically rotate to magnetic north. I thought that was pretty cool. I assumed it would do this. So now if my buddy cop friend is ever backpacking, hiking with this box on his back, he can, grab his key and find his way home. As I'm working on a commission, I'm always thinking and hoping that the customer likes it as much as I do. These drawer parts were cut oversized. I let them rest for a few days, then I milled them slightly, let them rest for a few more days, milled them again. I did this several times to ensure that these parts were beautiful and acclimated. This is the best way to mitigate warping. The drawer box is assembled with dovetail joints, specifically table saw dovetail joints. This is a super easy process. It ensures accuracy and it's fast, and I use spacers to make sure that the tails and the pins are precisely placed. Check out my YouTube video on how this process works. It is fantastic. So yeah, this isn't really a tutorial on dovetails, table saw dovetails, but I just wanted to show you how effective using tape can be to mark things out. I actually like putting a shoulder on the inside, but I am not a big fan of that scribe line. That's typically on the outside. Anyway, check out the video if you want to see more. I typically size dovetail joints a little bit on the tight side. That way, later I can use a hand plane or a belt sander to make the inside smooth, a little bit thinner, and a better fit. There we go. That fits just about as good as that vehicle sounds. I like scuffing the veneer and the substrate with something like 80 grit. And this grit grip is the perfect sandpaper to do this. This quickly removes any oxidation and gives you just enough scuff for the glue to bond. For veneer work in a vacuum bag, I use all types of different glues. I've tried them all. I do like epoxy. It is a little bit messier, but the bond is insanely good. Yeah, there's a little bit of squeeze out. We can deal with that easily. And one of the primary reasons I like epoxy is because it doesn't add moisture or water to the mix, right? So there's a lot less chance of warping. Here is something that I've noticed with epoxy as well. So check out these veneers. This maple is a commercial veneer, raw veneer, and it's going to be about 27 thousandths or about 0.7 millimeters. And this burl veneer is substantially thicker. It's over a 1/16 of an inch thick or about 1.7 millimeters. And one is on the front of a panel and one is on the back. And that's a no-no, right? Should be the same thickness. Well, maybe. But I like to sample and experiment. So for a small panel with epoxy, even though these veneers are thin on one side, thicker on the other, I don't get any warping. The reason for that is because epoxy creates a true rigid bond. It doesn't introduce moisture, and the panels will stay nice and flat. I like to stretch rules and test boundaries. But keep in mind, if you do this and it doesn't work for you, don't blame me. I only do this if the panels are relatively small. I've never been a fan of a groove in a drawer box for two reasons. Typically, they don't get glued in because it's messy. And yes, in a traditional drawer, it would be solid wood and it can't be glued in. And so with a groove and no glue, you don't gain the rigidity that a bottom can provide. But with a rebate or rabbet, that bottom can be glued in solid. It provides rigidity, and it's also going to make sure that this box won't twist or warp, which is really important on this project. I always feel honored when somebody trusts in my work, and I want to go above and beyond with design and the quality of craftsmanship. I typically shoot for dovetails or box joints to be dead on flush. It just makes them easier to clamp. But with this drawer box, I need to sneak up on a perfect fit, so these plastic blocks or cowls will bridge those high spots. I am attempting to work in thousandths of an inch to ensure that all these components are assembled extremely accurately. That way, the sliding drawer will work flawlessly for years to come. And a surefire method to achieve this is to use blocks or sticks. You'll notice I cut the angles opposite. That way I can fit those and I can use these to size the panels. Then I can take these to the table saw to make a perfect replication of that exact dimension. Very effective. I'll use this exact same process for the panel in the lid, and I'll show that a little bit later. All right, so prior to assembly of the front panel, I had to make a little cavity to allow for the bloom touch latch. And so in order to make everything line up, I drilled a rail and the panel at the same time. I didn't have a lot of room, but it worked. So here I have a cabinet door touch latch. This is a Bloom tip-on. That'll slip right in the panel. And then the rail will fit over that. And this will give a place for the release for the bullet or the key. Since the panel is getting glued tight to the rail, I put a little counter bore to allow for that little extrusion. So everything is nice and tight and everything stays accurate. A lot of planning went into this, but it came out incredible. So I scuffed up the escutcheon, used some epoxy, and glued it in place. Super simple. Yeah, man, that's gonna work. For the drawer guides, finger quotes in the air, right? I used some extruded aluminum. This is just angle aluminum, aluminium, however you want to say it. And then I added this tape, and it has this plastic on it, UHMW or PTFE, I'm not really sure which, but it's super slick, low friction, and it'll allow that drawer to glide effortlessly across these drawer guides.
All right, I thought I'd share with you my favorite way to cut tapers. Of course, this is at a sliding table saw, but a Fritz Franz jig reigns supreme. And this exceptional design is by my buddy David Bedrosian. You can see it has these built-in stops. I can set those exactly where I want them. They have an adjustable zero clearance backup strip, so you can set that exact to the left of the blade by just trimming it. And now as I make the cut, I want to point out two things. A, the end that's getting cut the most has pencil marks, so I can see that so I don't make any mistakes. And two, that fat end of the wedge, that offcut piece, it's on the tailing end. That way it doesn't get caught between your blade and your insert. Although in my case, I use a zero clearance insert. It's not an issue, but yeah, it makes a big difference. Boom, beautiful. Yep, Fritz Franz by David Bedrosian.
All right. Got a strong raking light, low angle light. And with the tapers cut, we can clean up those saw marks, the hand plane, check things for square. And yeah, that's looking clean and beautiful. Progress, right? At this stage, I had sub-assemblies glued up. Working like this allows me to dry assemble things. Here I'm drilling a small hole for the latch. It'll get filled later and just look like a knot. I drilled all the way through that rail into the drawer box, ensuring perfect alignment. I wanted that escutcheon super smooth inside, that way that cylinder magnet would travel freely. With that small hole marking the spot, I could drill for the escutcheon. Here you can see a small drill bit epoxied into this dowel. The small drill bit is what attracts the cylinder magnet and keeps the drawer locked by default. I started with tiny drill bits and worked my way up until I got the perfect attraction. This worked superbly well, and now the magnet in the bullet overrides that attraction to unlock the latch. So I must have missed getting footage of the assembly, but essentially what I did was make sub-assemblies. The front and the back sub-assembly was one part, and then this part was the second, and then I glued all that together. All right, this was a test, and I was extremely pleased. This is exactly what I was after. The drawer moves effortlessly, no bind, regardless of where I push or pull it. Yeah, that is awesome. There will be a small internal tray up at the top, and it's specific for some badges and a set of handcuffs. So after cutting all of the box joints, I break out one of my favorite tools, the belt sander, 180 grit, and then 220 grit to smooth things out. To keep this tray profile really low, I rabbet the bottom in instead of cutting it into a groove. I'm not a big fan of grooves for drawers. A panel going into the bottom into a rebate or a rabbet will be much stronger than a groove. Glued in solid, this provides extreme rigidity. And I added some little thumb and finger holes. Just these little dimples just makes the removal of the tray much easier. I believe this is 180 grit. Just makes all the corners nice and flush, super easy, and no chance of tear out with a hand plane. And here's the tray, a little bit big. We'll size it accordingly till it slips right in. At the last minute, I decided to add veneer to the bottom. I used epoxy. This will create even more rigidity, and a keen eye would probably look at the bottom of that tray and wonder how it was assembled. But yeah, beautiful. Everything's perfect and solid. I love it. The customer had requested a thin blue line in the lid, which I thought was a fantastic idea. Check out how I did it. Here at my veneer sled, I've got 2 sandpaper blocks clamped in place. I've made my first cut on the left side of the workpiece. Against the 2 stop blocks, I'll add 2 drill bits that equal the kerf of the blade plus that 1/16th target dimension. Now I can slide the workpiece back against the drill bits, clamp that down, make another cut, and that will ensure that I have a perfect 1/16th thin blue line. Remove the stop blocks, make the cut. This ensures accuracy, and I can come up with any width as long as I have 2 spacers to create that value. Excellent.
I'm cutting some grooves, right? This is my target dimension, thickness. I've already used a dado stack with 1 chipper to create this size. It's a little undersized, and so now we can see what the difference is. This is about 430, and this is right at 390. So we know that difference is about 40 thou. I've set up a dial caliper. I'll zero it out, and I'll move this over to make this cut just a little bit thinner by 20 thou.
And maybe a couple of thou slack on each side.
I have a sample. Let's run it.
This may seem, I don't know, ridiculous working with thousands, but I need this panel to be really a quality fit. Of course, these are just sample pieces, and the panel will get a final sand, turn out just a little bit thinner, and be perfect. I cut the miters for the frame at the chop saw, and notice the little piece I put into this groove that prevents any chip out. You may also notice that each corner has a perfect grain match. That took a little bit of time, but I love doing stuff like that. I think it's worth it. In addition, all the grain is radiating or bowed outwards. The top, the bottom, and the sides. That grain just has a slight bow to it. Just gives it a beautiful effect. It's all in the details, man. You can see here we've got just about a perfect grain match, and all 4 corners look like that. Man, I love this stuff. You want perfectly fitting miters? A shooting board and a shooting plane is the ultimate way to achieve this. I haven't always done this, but as I get better as a craftsman, this step takes hardly any time and makes a massive difference. A shooting plane will also give you the opportunity to size your opposite pieces exactly the same length.
All right, with the miters fitting perfectly, the inside has been hit with a hand plane. Miters have been shot, right? Now we can size the panel. Now, rather than trying to measure from here to here, I just like using something like this, and I'm going to make this just a tad short. Let me see, let me line that guy up there like that. Mark this. I'll cut this to length, then I can use this at the sliding table saw, or you could use this same approach at a regular table saw with a crosscut sled. So much more accurate than trying to put a ruler in there or try to measure it. And when I say just a little bit short, I'm maybe a 64th of an inch, 15 thou. I want this panel to go all the way in this groove and get glued in solid. That's the beauty of using veneer versus a solid wood panel. But that's a whole different story, since you wouldn't be able to do this marquetry with solid wood. But so yeah, pros and cons to everything.
All right, here we go. Got my transfer stick. I don't know what you'd call it. It's not really a story pole, but I can put one end right against carbide of the saw blade, set my stop, boom, ready to go. On this guy, man, I got to tell you, I love this tiger fence. I can punch whatever dimension I want into the thousandths of an inch. This just happens to be 10 3/8, but that not much wiggle, so that looks good. Yeah, man. I glued two opposite corners, and here I'm doing a dry run with these unique clamping blocks. Check them out. So most people are familiar with the clamping cowl that has a little 45-degree angle on it, and you can put it on the edge, right? I have a little bit of sandpaper on there for better grip, and then you clamp across that miter. But if you have a panel inside, you can't do that, right? But with these dudes, very similar. You can see that 1/4-inch material has sandpaper. I can clamp those to the frame and then just clamp across them. It worked amazingly well. So even with a panel in a groove, we can still clamp those cowls to the frame. This was a mock-up of the lid using a piece of poplar and 28 degrees. Yeah, I like it. This is my old, ugly spline jig. I don't use it very often, but it works. Quick tip, once you glue in your splines, smash that space tight. At this point, I was super excited. I am getting close. All right, it's spray day. It's my favorite, right? Anytime you apply a finish, you can see those colors just come alive and everything begins to pop. Man, that's going to look amazing. I mean, it does look amazing. Check it out. How cool is that? And I know a lot of people want to give me crap about spraying outside. Look, there were no bugs in the air. There's not any dust in the air. I can create a flawless finish. Flawless? I used medium CA glue to glue on some leather pads. Thanks, Starbond. Couple things when working with brass screws. A, use wax, chapstick, whatever. And 2, use a regular steel screw after you've drilled to create those threads. I got to tell you, I was extremely pleased with this piece. One of my favorites. So it's kind of funny, when Tony first contacted me, he wasn't retired yet. He's still not retired. So we had some time, but I always felt pressured to get going on this piece. But a lot of the ideas, it took time for them to materialize. And truthfully, some of the ideas didn't even come into play. Initially, this was going to have 2 different drawers, but that wouldn't work because they would be too short. And here's that key in action. That releases that latch and boom. Yeah, man, I love it. And one morning I was talking with my lovely lady and I told her I need to get going, and it just came out on that chest for Two Guns Tony. We've been calling him that ever since. Now, the entire logo was created with the Shaper Origin. I do have footage, and I may make a video on that. Here we have genuine buffalo leather down in the bottom and in the tray. The badges were strategically placed. The lieutenant badge in the front is the focal point. And that is a wrap for this project and video. Please remember to like and subscribe and get out in your shop and make something beautiful.